Okay, so this little video, I'm going to go through pretty quickly just solving quadratics with the two methods that were taught this week of using square roots and then using the quadratic formula. I'm going to go fairly quickly because you can pause and go back and look over anything and do it at your own time. All right, so first solving by square roots. So this method is best when you're missing that x term. So notice my quadratic here, I have the x squared, I have a constant in my equation, but I don't have the x term. So this is when square roots can be really easy. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to isolate our x squared. So I'm going to add the 81 to both sides of my equation. And so that I have x squared is equal to positive 81. And now that I've isolated my x squared, in order to solve for x, one factor of x, we're going to take the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides so that I have x over here. And now remember, we've talked about this, that these numbers all have two roots. You have a positive root and a negative root. So the square root of 81, we're going to write as positive or negative 9. So there are two solutions here, either positive 9 or negative 9 will work when we plug it into our equation. Hopefully some of you noticed this is also a difference of squares. So you could have done this one by factoring. Real quick off to the side, I could have factored that as x plus 9 times x minus 9 equals 0, and then separated that and solved it that way. We'd still get negative 9 and positive 9 as my two solutions. All right, so the second one here, now I have 3x squared plus 10 equals 64. Again, I don't have an x term. I just have my x squared and I have constants. So that's when square roots can really be helpful. So I'm going to subtract the 10 on both sides. So I have 3x squared equals 54. Then I'm going to divide by 3. Remember, we want to isolate that x squared. So I end up with x squared equals 18. So now I'm going to take my square roots on both sides to solve for x, and I'm going to come up here. So I end up with positive or negative root 18. Now 18 is not a perfect square, doesn't have a perfect square root, but we can simplify this radical. So hopefully we remember that. 18 does have a perfect square factor of 9. It's 9 times 2. So I can take the square root of 9. So I have positive or negative. The square root of 9 is 3. And then I'm left with a root 2 inside. So 3 root 2. So positive 3 root 2 and negative 3 root 2 are my two solutions. All right, let's look at this equation. Now this one's a little bit different. But since I have an expression squared here, I have x minus 2, that whole expression being squared, and that equals a constant, then we can solve this one by square roots too. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. All right, so the square root of the quantity x minus 2 squared would just leave me with x minus 2. The square root of 49, lovely, it is a perfect square, is either positive or negative 7. So please don't forget that you have those two roots there, so keep that in mind. All right, so my next step then is to add the 2 to both sides. All right, so that I end up with x equals 2 plus 7 or 2 minus 7. All right, and 2 plus 7 will be 9. And 2 minus 7 will be negative 5. All right, so those are my two solutions there, 9 or negative 5. If I plug in here, subtract 2, take that and square it, it will equal 49. All right, so here's another, let me go ahead and erase my ink there. And this kind of walks that through that again. If you want to pause that and look at that again. All right, so do these examples here. So I'm going to solve this one by square roots. I have this expression squared equals 25. So I am going to take the square root of both sides. So on this side, I'm left with x plus 3. On the right side, the square root of 25 is 5, but remember we have a positive or negative root there. Then I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. So I have negative 3 plus or minus 5. So my two solutions, if you want to spread them out, spread them out. I have negative 3 plus 5, and x also equals negative 3 minus 5. So my two solutions here are positive 2 and negative 8. So if you're asked for the positive solution to this equation, you would choose 2. If you're asked for the negative solution is negative 8. Okay? All right, number 2, a little extra step here. I need to get rid of this 5, this factor of 5 out here, so that then I have something I can take the square root of. So we're going to divide both sides by 5 first. So I have 1 times x minus 1 squared equals 4. Now I have an expression squared equals a constant, so I'm going to go ahead and take my square root, both sides. So I have x minus 1 equals positive or negative 2. And I'm going to add 1 to both sides. And I always put this in front because it makes more sense. 1 plus or minus 2, right? So x is equal to 1 plus or minus 2. Which gives me two solutions. 1 plus 2 is a positive 3. 1 minus 2 is a negative 1. So there are my two solutions. Again, one of them is positive, one of them was negative. It's not always the case. All right, then to refresh with quadratic formula. So this is on your star chart. You don't have to memorize it, but I'll have it up here for you. Now, when you're going to use this quadratic formula, you can use this with any quadratic equation, and it will work. But you do need to get it in standard form because we do need to be able to pull values for A, for B, and for C. So if it's not in standard form, then you might not be pulling the correct values. All right, so A in this case is 4, B is positive 3, and C is negative 10. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and plug into my equation up here. And if I skip a step or two, just kind of pause. So this means opposite of B. So negative B really just means what's the opposite of your B value? So opposite of positive 3 is negative 3. And what's nice about the quadratic formula is it already works in that plus or minus. It gives you the two roots, all right, already. So I have plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 3 squared is 9, minus 4, times my a value, which is also 4, times my c value, which is negative 10. Yeah, so that's a long radical there, a lot going on in there, over, and then 2 times our a value, which is 4. All right, so I'm going to work inside the radical first and simplify this expression here. So this becomes 9, negative 4 times negative 10 will become a positive 160. So I end up with x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 160. All of this will give me 169 over 8. 169 is a perfect square, so x equals negative 3 plus or minus 13 over 8. So here's where I'm going to then separate it into my two solutions. I need to do negative 3 plus 13, which is 10, so I have 10/8. And then I need to do negative 3 minus 13, which is negative 16/8. And then we'll simplify that. So my two solutions here, x is 5/4, and I'm running out of space, so I'll come up here. 5/4, positive, and negative 16 divided by 8 is negative 2. So those are my two solutions, one positive and one negative in that case. All right, this next one, I'm going to go a little bit quicker. Make sure, again, it's in standard form, so I'm going to subtract the 15 on both sides. So 0 equals x squared minus 2x minus 15. A is 1, B is negative 2, C is negative 15. I'm going to plug into my formula here. I have x equals, this time positive 2, opposite of negative 2 is positive 2, plus or minus the square root of b squared will be 4, minus 4 times 1 times negative 15, all over 2 times 1. All right, so when I simplify that, I end up with x is equal to 2 plus or minus the square root of 64 over 2. Square root of 64 is 8. So I have 2 plus or minus 8 over 2. 2 plus 8 will be 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 minus 8 is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Oops, that's an equal sign. So positive 5 and negative 3. All right, the last one I want to work through just because this one doesn't come out nice and pretty, and they are not always going to. But it still works. So I'm going to plug in. I need opposite b, so positive 3 plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared is 9, minus 4 times 1 times negative 5 over 2 times 1. All right, when I work in here, this gives me positive 29 plus 20 is 29. So I have 3 plus or minus the square root of 29 over 2. Now 29 is not a perfect square, and it doesn't have any perfect square factors. I can't bring out any factors of 29 that have a square root. So I'm going to leave it like this, but understand there are two solutions. I have 3 plus the square root of 29 over 2, and I have 3 minus the square root of 29 over 2. And if you wanted exact numbers, you could put this in your calculator and get a decimal, but we're going to go ahead and leave it like that. So I hope that helped. Go back if you have any more questions. Please feel free to email me, and I'll get back to you, or Mr. Lawrence or somebody, Ms. Nehus and Mr. Kaltenbacher. Somebody will get back to you. Have a good day.